I made a joking post recently about how certain breeds of fandoms on the internet might just be a consequence of the brightly colored casts of characters that occupy the shows and media they're obsessed with. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, Steven Universe, Homestuck, Has-Been Hotel, Undertale. All of these works and more share two things in common no matter what: unconventional neon-colored character designs, and obsessed fandoms full of unconventional neon-brained people. These shows and games and popular pieces of animated media are basically the entertainment junkies' version of Pixie Sticks, giving consumers the visual equivalent of a sugar high that compels them to commit evil acts on Tumblr and Twitter. Whenever one of these suckers pops off, it's like the internet is taken hostage for an undetermined amount of time, until the sugar high is passed, or at least been replaced with something even more addictive. Since I made this correlation between candy and cartoons, people have been asking me what makes these shows and pieces of media like that. We can recognize that these art styles are appealing, even addicting, but what about them specifically makes them so appealing and addicting in the first place? What exactly made RWBY the biggest hit on the internet before becoming the biggest flop? Why did an entire generation of grown-ass men who work 9 to 5s and pay their taxes become so obsessed with this children's show from 2010? Why is it that every time I look at these two pieces of do I turn into a cracked out raging with the literary skills of an English university dropout and the emotional management of a toddler? Well, I've got a diploma in 2D animation and character design from a school that no longer exists. It's been collecting dust until this exact moment. So turn on your favorite hyperfixation if you need the background noise on top of this background noise, and let's talk about character design and why the little worm in your brain tweaks the fuck out every time it sees Twilight Sparkle and Charlie Morningstar. I'm gonna begin by breaking down what I call the holy triangle of character design. The characters and shows we talk about here won't necessarily hit all three, but it can be a fun graph to refer to whenever you're analyzing character design, as most good character designs will nail at least two of these.
Blue. Red. Green.
Green is not a creative color.
To start with the most obvious to the majority of viewers, the Triforce of color choice. This is where you get your first hit of dopamine as your eyes take in the bright colors and bold contrasts of the media that's about to change your brain chemistry like DMT in a back alley. Color choice is a huge defining factor of character design because color is one of the first things that can inform you about a character's personality and motives. Maybe you want your characters to be soft and approachable, or maybe you want them to look dastardly evil. No matter what your character's personality type is, color is one of the first and biggest things you can use to express that without the need for words. While warm-toned colors like red, orange, and yellow can have a more aggressive and in-your-face vibe, cooler-toned colors like blue and green invoke a certain calmness and wisdom. And oftentimes, color choice is pure marketing. A little fun fact about color choice that's going to age me immediately: The Simpsons were specifically designed to be yellow because at the time, when you'd be flicking through channels on your TV at Mach 5, their bright jaundice-toned skin would catch your attention, and you'd likely be more compelled to flip back to the channel you saw them on. This helped separate The Simpsons from other sitcoms in a time when animated sitcoms weren't really a thing yet, and they had to do what they could to define themselves on network TV. A good example of communicative color choice is the hot mess that is RWBY. The release of its first trailer, literally called Red, was so game-changing that it practically broke our collective understanding of what indie animation could be. I know it kinda looks like shit today, and it also kinda looked like shit back then too, but you gotta understand, when this came out, I was in, like, the 10th grade, and I was obsessed immediately. The action, the music, the scythe, but most of all, the color. This trailer demanded your attention and rewarded it with flurries of red and black. Even the animated blood was conveyed through red blossoms that would flutter around the screen. You literally couldn't look away. There was no dialogue, there was no context, you didn't need context because the story had already sold itself on the action and animated choreography alone. Who is this girl? Who gives a shit? Look at the site. What are these monsters? Doesn't matter because you just watch them turn into birthday confetti. Of course, we would later get voice acting and actual storytelling in the later trailers, each titled after the iconic color schemes of the members of Team RWBY, but it's extremely telling that none of those trailers surpassed or even came close to the impact the first Red trailer had on YouTube. Even the actual show wasn't as good as that first trailer. That's how genius and groundbreaking it really was. And sometimes the piece of media doesn't necessarily need meaning behind its colors for them to trap the unsuspecting viewer. I can think of no better example than Lore Olympus, which I am legally required to mention at least once in every video I make. While Lore Olympus initially started off as this promising series with beautiful contrasting colors, over time it lost its literal glow, becoming an oversaturated mess robbed of its simplicity and boldness. But when you actually go through some of the interviews from its creator, Rachel Smythe, it turns out that a lot of its initial strong character design may have just been sheer luck, because evidently not a lot of actual thought went into the color choices behind each character. Take Zeus. On the one hand, readers might attribute his purple coloring to the color of royalty or lightning, but Rachel Smythe, on the other hand, has posed that maybe it's just the characters with high sex drives who are purple? Does it make any sense? Not at all. Does it matter? Not for 98% of the people who read and obsess over it, because pink and blue make brain go brrr, and you can't argue with results. Sitting next to the Triforce of Color is the Triforce of Shape language, the literal triangle of our golden triangle. You ever look at a character design and think, man, this looks like something from Cartoon Network circa 2016? Well, for a long time now, the animation industry has embraced the softer, rounded curves of what many call the CalArt style, which is made up of a combination of huggable characters with big bean mouths. There are a few reasons this art style has gripped the internet and simultaneously pissed it off, but the one that concerns us today is shape language. You see, shape language alone can also express your character's personality, as well as your show's overall tone. There's a reason popular children's shows like Bluey are made up of softer edges, round curves, and light colors. Because it's pleasing and calming to the eye, it gets your child's attention without overloading them with too much visual information, and it conveys a huggable, friendly character. The same can be said about Steven Universe. Notice how the main characters are made up of predominantly softer, rounder features and lighter colors, but when it comes to the diamonds, they often consist of harsher, oversaturated tones and sharper edges. White Diamond is literally blinding with how white she is, and her sharp edges convey a feeling of unease and danger. Whereas Pink Diamond's turn against her sisters is actually foreshadowed in her design. Unlike her sisters, she's round and a soft pink color, which would only be accentuated further by her shift into rose quartz. This combination of shape language and color choice sets her apart from her siblings, as she doesn't conform to their fascist regime. Or maybe not, I don't know. I've never watched Steven Universe.
You're a phony! Hey, this guy's a great big phony!
Speaking of addictive shows I've never watched, Hazbin Hotel is pointy. Hazbin Hotel is full of pointy points.
Writing stuff is hard, so I use a pointy pencil. Pointy, point. What's that horrible smell?
You couldn't walk 2 feet in Hazbin Hotel's version of hell without getting your eye poked out by someone's choice of hairstyle. Is this to the show's benefit? Maybe, maybe not. Sorry for those of you who might have been expecting some Hazbin Hotel analysis, but that show and its fandom are a box I refuse to open. I'm haunted enough as it is by the voice of Rachel Smythe whispering sweet tauntings in my ear, compelling me to commit Tumblr crimes. I don't need Vivzy Pop in my ear, too. I think we as human beings can only handle one Roman Empire at a time, and Lore Olympus is unfortunately my burden to bear.
I'm half crazy.
This one's less about the surface level design and more about what's on the inside, and that's what makes up the bulk of why these characters are so addicting after that first hit of visual sugar. The color and shape design are just the gateway drug. It's the personality, the real meat of the character, the substance that sends us on a brainworm trip unlike any other. I know sometimes when we hear the word trope, we sigh and groan at the thought of bad tropey writing. It can sometimes come with the implication that a character can be reduced to 2 or 3 simple, relatable traits without any depth beyond that. But that's really just a symptom of bad character writing. On the whole, even the deepest, most well-written characters in media can still be described using familiar tropes. Tropes aren't inherently a bad thing on their own, it's just poor use of tropes that makes tropes as a whole seem like some terrible writer's crutch. Personality tropes are where a character truly comes into its own beyond its first impressions of color and shapes. Establishing the specific trope and personality quirks of a character can either help reinforce their artistic design, or even subvert it entirely. My Little Pony Friendship is Magic is so devoted to its personality tropes that it is literally hardwired into the lore that every pony is eventually granted a symbol of their trope through their cutie marks. Sure, their cutie marks are meant to represent more their specific talents and passions, but when their personalities are largely written around those talents, well, a horse is a horse, of course. Pinkie Pie's the party animal, Rarity is the high-class babe with exquisite taste in fashion and gems, Twilight Sparkle is ambitious and dedicated to her passion for magic. You can check out the MLP FIM wiki if you really want to know all of them. MLP is also one of the few shows to pull off same-face syndrome, as just about every pony is modeled off the exact same base character model. Girl pony look like this. Boy pony look like this. Super OP princess pony look like this. Discord! But they're separated by their colors, hairstyles, unique pony traits like wings or horns, and of course, their cutie marks. And so the show relies extremely heavily on character archetyping to separate their characters' personalities, because without that, they would all just be the same horse with different coats of paint. Because MLP is so committed to its tropes, it creates a sort of tribal dedication between the characters and the show's viewers. No matter who you are, what your background is, where you come from, what you do in life, there's always at least one pony who you're going to see yourself in and relate to. And because there's likely a pony you relate to on a personal level, there's also probably an episode that exists that addresses the similar problems you have to that pony. Maybe you're a little meek like Fluttershy and wish you were better at making friends. Maybe you're easily excitable like Pinkie Pie and always feel like you're too much for the friends you have. Maybe you just flat out think you don't need friends because maintaining relationships would just compete with your personal passions like Twilight Sparkle. This is basically why MLP was flooded with populations of adult men back in the early to mid 2000s, because it was a show that was so relatable regardless of age or gender or background. It allowed viewers to face and address their personal insecurities both within themselves and with others. It created that sense of community where, essentially, everyone who watched it together was just attending a big group therapy session. Lessons for adults are just lessons we didn't learn when we were children, after all.
Guys.
The concept of tropes is actually called into question in another show, though, and flipped on its head. This is a show that actually defies surface-level character design. Unlike My Little Pony or Steven Universe, you can't really get a full sense of its characters' personalities based on their surface-level appearances, because their surface-level appearances, well, whatever the fuck this thing is. Or this. The color choices and shape language of the amazing digital circus are quite literally a circus of unclear decisions. Many of the characters are literally based on inanimate objects, so if you go into the show blind, you're probably not going to be able to tell right away what kind of character Ragatha is supposed to be, or Kinger. And for a while, that was actually a criticism I maintained of the show, that it didn't really have much of a clear visual identity outside of weird computer program. It felt too difficult as a viewer to really understand what role each character was meant to play. Sure, it was definitely memorable, but I didn't like that I couldn't pin down a reason why beyond, well, he's literally a set of dentures and a pair of eyeballs.
Now, you know what they say about assuming. It makes an ass out of you and Ming.
But then we got episode 6, and with it we got Jax's monologue about archetypes. And this is where my opinion of the show's character designs started to shift.
All we are now is a bunch of cartoon characters. So what's the point of pretending we're not?
Jax goes on this monologue about how everyone in the circus fits into a specific role, and he has the audacity to assign himself the role of the funny one. This label he's given himself is obviously just a coping mechanism for his crumbling psyche, but his speech still has merit in the wider discussion of character design, especially when it comes to the artistic designs of the cast themselves. These unspecific character designs now seem intentionally crafted to challenge both Jax's and the audience's beliefs that everyone in the circus is not only one-dimensional, but obligated to be one-dimensional. That even if they try to be anything but their archetypes, they'll eventually slip back and become simplistic one-note ponies again. But this belief is just that. A belief. As much as Jax wants to believe that everyone in the circus fits into a box, that is, again, just his way of coping and refusing to get to know people. Is it that the people around him unknowingly slip back into their archetypes? Or is it that he simply refuses to get to know them beyond those archetypes, because he's already assigned those archetypes to them, and doesn't think it's worth bothering to dig deeper beyond that? After all, if he compartmentalizes everyone into personality traits that he understands, that means he doesn't have to risk being challenged on what he doesn't understand. It doesn't matter to him if Zooble or Kinger or Gangle have more complex personalities, because as far as he's concerned, they're only worth his own surface-level assumption of them. I would even dare say that Jax's monologue accidentally foreshadowed a real-life occurrence of forceful archetyping. I haven't talked about it much yet, as much as I alluded to it in the intro, but Knights of Guinevere actually plays an extremely important role in this subject. It is quite literally a metatextual response to Disney's rampant monopolization of the industry, written from the experience of Owl House showrunner Dana Terrace herself, a former Disney animator. Of course, it has more going on to it than just Disney bad, but at the onset, it's pretty obvious that this is meant to be both a love letter to indie animation and a protest and defiance of corporate industrialization. Beyond that, Princess Guinevere herself embodies tropes. She's the ethereally beautiful mascot character meant to convey the messaging of corporate mascots like Mickey Mouse, but she's also clearly meant to subvert her surface appearance, as under the surface she's a princess in need of rescue trapped within the industrial hell that is Park Planet. It's a conflict that is both inner and outer, as her internal suffering is at odds with the external appearance that she's being forced to wear. She's designed to be as relatable and appealing as possible to onlookers in the park, while her true self contained within is what's most relatable and appealing to the viewers who want to see her break free. Ironically, these flawed assumptions of characters was extremely apparent not just in the show, but what happened after the pilot's release. And it was all because of this one line.
Well, ain't this a fucking howdy do? Andrea, Franklin, you taking my prize hog for a night stroll? What is this, Franklin? Is this Franklin? Franklin?
That one line triggered a short but very frustrating period in the emerging fandom, and it started with a simple question. Did Sparky just dead name a trans woman? And no, he did not. Dana confirmed this very simply, that Frankie is a cis woman. People just call her a lot of nicknames, and this relates to Dana's own experiences as a woman with a unisex name. This was a very straightforward, normal response. The internet, of course, turned it into a shit show. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say there's enough trans representation in media, because there isn't. And I can fully understand why some people in the fandom had become so invested in their headcanon that Frankie was a trans woman. But unfortunately, headcanons are often conflated with actual canon, to an extent that people who believe in them will argue and defend their headcanons, to the point of basically insisting that if their headcanon isn't made canon, then that means there's something wrong with the creator. And this is precisely what happened in the wake of the Franklin debacle. Accusations of transphobia were thrown around, the Blue Sky battleground was littered with arguments and debates over what counts as real representation. And it was frankly just a really annoying time to be in the subreddit, because it's all anyone was talking about for a straight week. But really, what was the outcome that we were hoping for here? To forcefully change Dana Terrace's character into a trans woman? Speaking as a two-spirited person, do we really want trans representation to be gained by bullying creators and forcing them to change their character? Because if Dana had done that, she would have just as quickly been accused of pandering and pulling a Dumbledore as gay. And let's say, hypothetically, if Frankie were a trans woman from the start, she likely would have gotten equal amounts of backlash from looking too masculine, not being pretty enough, or not fitting the definition of what people think a trans woman should look like. It really goes to show that no woman is free from toxic beauty standards, cis or trans. Of course, I can't speak for all trans people, I'm just one bird, but I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that what we want out of trans representation is intentional trans representation. Representation that's earnest and intended from the beginning. And not inauthentic representation that's simply looking to score brownie points. And honestly, the arguments in favor of trans Frankie forgot one crucial part of this argument. Sparky. Making Frankie trans to appease the headcanon crowd would also mean making Sparky a gay man transphobic. Yes, transphobic gay men exist, but that clearly wasn't the character Dana was trying to write. And it would mean a trans femme voice actress would have to voice a transphobic male character. Yes, Sparky is played by a trans woman. So forcefully turning Frankie into a trans rep character would also mean forcefully shifting a gay man into a transphobe and rooting yet another trans story in hatred and bigotry, which I can honestly say we have enough of. And really, insisting that Frankie has to be trans because of that one throwaway line, otherwise the show fails at representation, is missing the forest for the trees. Frankie is also very clearly a butch woman, someone who doesn't conform to the same commercial beauty norms that someone like, I don't know, Princess Guinevere herself is being actively forced to conform to. She also works in a male-dominated field. To accuse Dana Terrace of robbing the trans community of representation simply because she confirmed Frankie's gender as cisgender is also being ignorant to what she can represent through her visual design and what she has to offer the story through her character. A character which we still haven't even fully explored because the show only has one episode. Like, goddamn, this is the kind of discourse you expect after season 8 of Game of Thrones, not a single pilot episode. Fortunately, this controversy has largely swept over because it wasn't even that big of a controversy to begin with. As with many online outrage mobs, they're mostly made up of loud voices coming from a handful of people, so the show was never at risk of being cancelled from this. And Dana herself has reiterated that she doesn't mind if people headcanon Frankie as trans or ship her with Andy. She was just answering a question as the creator of the work. Canon information is still important after all, so we as fans can know where the line exists between canon and fanfiction. So why am I talking about it? Well, remember what I said about Jax and assumptions? We as viewers can be just as guilty of assigning labels and expectations to characters simply based on our own interpretations of their visual design or their writing. Much like Jax assuming that all his peers are only capable of being their assigned archetypes that he assigned them, parts of the Knights of Guinevere fandom fell victim to assuming that Frankie could only be what they assumed of her, or that by Dana confirming what she was, it somehow robbed her of her depth and complexity and capability to be relatable. I don't necessarily blame the people who felt robbed by Dana's confirmation of Frankie's gender identity. It's natural to feel connected to a character based on our surface-level assumptions of them, and then feel let down when those assumptions aren't validated by the person who created them. But ultimately, those assumptions and expectations are on us, not the person we assigned them to. It's not the responsibility of the character or of any person to live up to an expectation that we set for them without their knowing. And just because that validation doesn't exist, it doesn't mean we as fans can't create it for ourselves. There's power in fan interpretation because it's that interpretation that allows us to channel it into something new. Literary analysis is undeniably an important part of media consumption, but it can also be quite contradictory. As viewers, we can only be so informed of the creator's intentions, and so we're always filling in blanks ourselves, which largely has to rely on assumption based on visual appearances and how we interpret written lines. But that's only one side of the coin. The other side is remembering that what we interpret isn't necessarily fact. The media itself is the divide between creator intent and audience interpretation. Just because the creator intended one thing doesn't mean it won't be interpreted as another thing. And reversely, just because a creator didn't intend something doesn't mean the audience won't embrace their own interpretation of it, even if it's in defiance of what the creator intended. And isn't that just the point of Knights of Guinevere in action? The assumption that Guinevere herself must conform to what Park Planet sells of her, that if she doesn't, she'll be rejected and thrown in the garbage. I realize this shifted quite a bit from talking about the practical essence of character design, but it is all rooted in character design when it comes right down to it. Shows like Knights of Guinevere are so immediately compelling and addictive for a reason, because they're so well crafted in their visual design and their intended writing. The characters are relatable, the premise and its subtext are often made up of shared feelings between the creators and the audience. The visual designs are a treat to the eyes, made up of colors and shapes that immediately inform us of the character's traits and quirks. It's no wonder we get so invested so quickly, precisely because we see ourselves in their feelings and struggles, even if they're separated from us through the lens of fiction. This entire tangent in and of itself is my own interpretation, so take it with as many grains of salt as you must. The freedom to disagree is the heart of literary analysis. So tell me, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts about the examples I included, or my own analysis of these works? Or do you have thoughts about another piece of media we didn't cover today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to create some discussion around this topic, especially for other artists like myself who are always eager to craft better characters and stories. Speaking of fan interpretations born from disappointment, I'm the guy who makes this comic right here, a fan-turned-hater retelling of Lore Olympus. It's entirely free to read, and we're currently coming up on a pretty intense arc of the story, so it's a great time to pick it up. I also stream over on my Twitch, so go give it a follow if you want to watch me work on comics live and talk about these kinds of subjects on the fly. Thanks for watching!